All right, let's go now to the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak gave a powerful speech at a synagogue, as I mentioned, overnight, where he said his government's support of Israel is unequivocal. Joining me now to discuss this, Editor-in-Chief of the Spectator magazine, Fraser Nelson, who joins us now from the UK. Fraser, thank you for your time. I mean, I listened to this speech last night. I played it again a couple of times today. It's brought tears to my eyes because he has said what we have been willing our Australian politicians here to say, but that they haven't said. How has this been received and what's been the reaction? I understand you too have had some pretty disgraceful anti-Semitic protests in the UK as well.
Yes, unfortunately, the anti-Semitic protests are taking place not just in the UK, but all over Europe. And it's in a city like London, it's so multicultural that you will find supporters of almost any cause. But outside the Israeli embassy, there was absolutely appalling scenes, which are really sort of chants that you hear. The number of people who are actually supporting Hamas in this country has taken a lot of people by surprise. Now, Rishi Sunak's speech, you're right, it was very robust and gave no quarter. But that wasn't actually unusual in Britain because the Labour Party is doing exactly the same, the opposition. There isn't really any political controversy about denouncing this, about standing completely by Israel at a time where, Hamas are going in there and they're executing women, children, babies, we heard yesterday as well. There isn't really any room for doubt, I think, as to what we see before our eyes. So we did see the Prime Minister there, but we also saw David Lammy, Labour's shadow foreign secretary. Nobody is really... You've got a couple of sort of crank politicians who are equivocating, but other than that, there is no real doubt or even variance in the language and the sentiments coming from all British political parties.
Yes, I think Labor has learned its lesson in the UK after the Jeremy Corbyn episode, but not so here in Australia. We've had some issues with some front benchers who have not denounced some of the hate preachers that we've seen here in Australia. But just when we're talking protests, you will have seen those scenes outside the Opera House in Sydney on Monday night. In particular, comments, chants like "gas the Jews" and other things I can't repeat on television. How's that been portrayed overseas?
Well, in a fairly competitive field, I think what's happened outside the Opera House was the worst display of anti-Semitism. You can get some protests where they're shouting "Free Palestine," pro-Hamas, and all the rest of it. That is rather as different to shouting "Gas the Jews." I think the Australian protests are the only ones in the world where that slogan has been audible from a crowd. And that has really focused minds on what we're seeing here. I mean, this is a repeat of the 1930s, a repeat of the genocidal logic which so terrified the world, and a repeat of things which, frankly, a lot of people thought and hoped they would never see again. So there have been, everywhere you go, there have been deeply unpleasant Hamas protests, but none of them as shocking as what we saw in Sydney.
Yeah, it brought to mind the speech recently by your Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who said, we must be on guard in the West about migrant populations who come to our countries and refuse to integrate in any way. I'm not saying assimilate. I'm saying keep, their traditions and their culture, but very much in our case become Australian. She said that's not always the case, and it's certainly, as we see playing out negatively too in the United Kingdom. That's also a debate we've got to have, isn't it?
Oh, sure, it's a debate, and it's a debate we've had for a while, that yes, you can have a multi-faith country. Britain's perhaps the most successful multi-faith democracy in Europe. You can have a multiracial society. I mean, Britain, through empire, is the original multiracial state. But a multicultural society is one that will always struggle to integrate. And that is a direction where those who believe in one country and social cohesion have been focusing away from multiculturalism and towards more one common set of cultural values. But that said, it would be a mistake to look at a group full of psychopaths protesting in a street in Sydney or in London or anywhere else and think that they speak for the Muslim population. I mean, there are millions of Muslims in Britain who would be appalled at what's happening with Hamas. The problem for the Muslim community is that they're rather let down by their spokesman. There is no kind of Muslim pope, as it were. It's difficult to speak for any community, but the Muslims are particularly badly served, I think, by pressure groups who are far too politicized, far more politicized than your average British Muslim, and will just struggle to condemn the attacks. In Britain, for example, we've got the Muslim Council of Britain has issued a statement which didn't really issue a word of condemnation. That does not reflect, I think, what most British Muslims are thinking.
Fraser Nelson, thank you. I'll be catching up with you in Australia next week. We'll see you then. Right, before we go, as I said there, I'll see him next week. There's a whole series of events with Fraser Nelson in Australia, including one in Melbourne at the Robert Menzies Institute dinner. Gala dinner. He's the keynote speaker. He'll be talking about the state of modern conservatism. Now, I'll declare I'm on the board of that institute. It's a not-for-profit at the University of Melbourne. But if you'd like to go, if you can attend, we'd love to have your company.